Welcome back, Honors! Welcome back to your Flip Classroom and our continuing discussion of the rise of the exploration period during the 1400s. Thank you, Pierre, for being so intense about that introduction. Now, really quick, what's going to happen is I'm going to clip in a flip from last year real fast, okay, that I actually did a really great job recording, and there's like a map, and you can draw on it and all this other kind of crazy stuff. So, anyway, big thing about it, though, is I'm going to be back here in about 2 seconds just to wrap this flip up a little bit, okay? But y'all go ahead and watch that, and I'll be back in 1 second.
Find his access route to India, right? So as you can tell, exploration, Renaissance, Reformation, all happening at the exact same time, right? The other big thing you need to understand about it as well is that Europeans wouldn't try to break into these markets until they had the necessary inventions to do so, right? They needed devices and technology, okay? The Europeans didn't always have sophisticated trade vessels like the ones you're seeing in this image, okay? They had a lot of different trade vessels that had square-shaped sails or were not actually built for long-distance trading. They were actually built for short-distance trading throughout their port cities and through the waterways of their own local kingdoms or little neighboring states, right? The thing about it is the Europeans lacked the sophistication at the time to actually go off and find these trade routes to India and other areas as well. Well, really quickly, other people had them though, right? Technology and inventions is going to be the very first step to the Europeans actually being able to go off and do these things, okay? Now, the reason why I have inventions in quotes is because most of the things that we're about to talk about, actually all three of the things that we're going to talk about that all start with C, okay? So actually had already been invented by basically Arab or Islamic traders and Italian ones as well. Because what happened was the Arabs actually learned from the Asians and the Africans as well how to make some of these devices for long-distance trading, and the Arabs then perfected them and made them better. And then when the Arabs began to trade with the Italians, like the Venetians and stuff like that, the city, of course, Venetians is the people who lived in Venice, that one merchant city who brought all the items in. When they began to actually trade with them, cultural diffusion will take place, and slowly these devices will make their way into Europe, and Europeans will learn how to use them, right? And the three big ones that we're going to talk about, I'll start with C, start off with one right here. Cartography, right? Cartography is one of the very serious inventions that needed to happen so Europeans could explore these different areas and start trying to find new trade routes, right? Cartography is a very fancy word for the science of map making, right? Making effective maps using longitude and latitude lines so you know your position on the earth. Now, there's a lot of other devices that are involved with this for anybody who's listening to this on YouTube right now and is like, well, what about the astrolabe and the sextant and the quadrant? Yes, all right, those devices go together, though, to make the science of cartography. Right? So or making cartography possible, right? Now, speaking of cartography, now that I have a map, now I need to know what direction I'm going. So the compass is going to be brought in, which was perfected by the Arabs, right? Magnetic compasses that actually can tell you if you're pointing towards the magnetic north pole of the earth were going to be very important. By the way, fun fact, you can actually make a compass using just a leaf, a puddle, and a paperclip, right? Because literally it will be attractive. You got to scrape the paperclip a little bit to actually line up the magnetic poles of it, and then it will eventually actually point north, right? So the compass is a very important device that will actually point its direction north and give these sailors some bearing and direction so they can know where they're going, right? And the Arabs have been using this thing for over 100 years, and they'd already perfected the use of it in general and combined it with that science of cartography, right? Now, caravels is another really big one. Speaking of particularly Iberian caravels, which are going to be very perfected items based off Arab trade vessels, but caravels are lighter, triangular sailed ships, right? So if you look at this back here, this triangular sail in the back of the actual boat can catch wind going both forward and backwards as well, right? It can actually make it so that the ship itself can travel into the wind or against it in both directions, right? These caravel ships, though, are also going to be fantastic trade vessels because they allow for longer stretches on the water without getting lost and being able to actually zigzag their way through the wind, right? So going into it, though, but where do the Europeans want to get to? And what do they want? Now, this is really big, okay? So now that the Europeans have cartography, compass, caravels, they have the devices necessary for actually sailing, but where do these people want to get to? Where do they want to go so bad, right? Well, the place they want to go is actually into that monsoon marketplace, right? So we're talking about breaking into that monsoon marketplace, and breaking into is really an operative term. The Europeans ultimately wanted to get to India and the Indian Ocean. That was where they wanted to get to more than anything else because it was a central access point within that monsoon marketplace that had a lot of access to goods that they wanted particularly that were worth a lot of money back in Europe, right? The most valued item, though, at the time, were spices, right? Spices coming mostly from the Indian subcontinent, right? Spices are going to be very important for a lot of different reasons, but the spices that grow naturally in India due to the very humid and very damp and then also very warm climate are going to be essential market items that are going to make Europeans tons of money. To give you a little bit of heads up, these right here are examples of spices, things like turmeric, cinnamon, black pepper, cloves, coriander, and red chili. The most important of all those spices, though, was none other than black pepper. Black peppercorns that actually grow off of pepper plants that actually grow in India was like, if you had black pepper on your table in Europe before all this really, really went down, it was like having a Ferrari in the garage, right? Like, for example, in the Dutch language, when Dutch people speak to one another, they have a phrase that has eked its way into their actual language. And when they actually say it to each other, it's like a colloquial saying, kind of like whenever Americans are just like, oh, I gotta, like, I don't know, what's a funny little saying that Americans have? So for example, like in New Orleans with all the, like, the EAUX, right, and like all that kind of stuff, the bro marks, bro bears, and like the actual, like, infiltration of, like, regular other words into their language, the Dutch have a friendly saying where they say, oh, it's pepperly expensive. Actually referring back to the fact that the Dutch actually traded in some of these early spices later on, and it meant that pepper was just that expensive back in the day, right? So in the 1400s, if you had black pepper on your table, it's like having a Ferrari in the garage, right? So the thing about it, though, is what about these spices can you use them for other than, like, flavoring things, okay? We have to understand that spices have very, very distinct uses, right? One, they can preserve food. They can also flavor that food. They are also very, very good for making medicine, right? Certain things in pepper is going to, like, there's a chemical inside of peppers known as capsaicin, and capsaicin actually opens up your sinuses and makes it easier to breathe. So if you have, like, a cold or something like that, it'll flush all that stuff out. It also makes luxury items, much like perfume, right? But how do they get there, right? Like, how are they going to get there? This is going to be really, really big when we're talking about the growth of European exploration, okay? So something we need to remember and understand is that I'm going to use my face to cover up this side of the map because the Europeans are operating based on a limited knowledge of the globe, right? They want to get to India, which is right there, okay? So we need to understand where they're trying to get to. They're trying to get here, which is India on this map, right? And they're located here in Europe. So how are you going to get from Europe all the way to India? Well, some of you are like, well, Mr. Terry, can't you just go along the map right here and just walk like a trade caravan all the way to India? Well, funny enough, no, you can't. That's a really, really great question. But the problem is that the Muslim kingdoms actually control all of northern Africa and all this area in the Middle East. And ever since the Crusades, they do not allow Christian traders to pass through their areas, right? Because they'll actually, like, arrest them and possibly end up executing them and stuff like that if they actually get busted or caught trying to actually move different items through Arab kingdoms, right? So the Arabs locked this area down. Now, some of you are like, well, can't you go up and around them, like into Russia and stuff? Well, no, because it's so cold in this area, right? It's frigid in this area. And there's also a huge mountain range right above India known as the Himalayas that you can't come in through the northern area from, okay? It's very, very cold. Also, the Mongols live out here, and the Mongols, as of the 1400s, are going to also convert to Islam. So they can't go in this direction either. Some of you are like, well, what if I just cut through Africa right here? This is also the Sahara, so you can't go that way either. So they have two ideas, right? One group of people is going to decide, I'm just going to head west, and I'm going to try to pop up on the other side of the earth, right? We'll talk about that guy a little bit later, but then another group's like, we got to go all the way around Africa, right? So the number one thing you have to notice is those inventions, that technology, those boats, all that stuff is going to be necessary because they have to take water routes to get to the prized possession of getting to India to get into that spice market, right? So that's going to be really, really important that you understand so you can so you can do a little bit better on this entire test and understand this unit a little bit better. But you can't go to the east because the Muslims are going to prevent you from going through that way. Can't go through the north because the climate's too cold in Russia, and also the Himalayas are going to stand in your way. And then also going into it as well, can't go through the middle of Africa because the Sahara Desert's there, right? Yeah, also, by the way, don't say Sahara Desert. That's actually dumb because it's saying, like, desert. Now, anyway, so who are the first two countries do we think are going to strike out, though, and get after it and go all the way to India? Well, actually, I'll go ahead and answer it for you. It's none other than the two European countries of Portugal and Spain, right? Portugal and Spain are going to be the very first two places that are going to try and strike out and get to India as fast as they can, right? By the way, might want to go ahead and check Google Classroom, because I'm going to go ahead and post pretty soon a map that you're going to be using for a map quiz next week, right? So make sure you go ahead and double check Google Classroom for the next couple of days, and that's going to be very, very important so you can do really well going into next week, right? So the thing that we need to understand, though, is the Portuguese, right, the people from Portugal right here on this side, and the people from Spain, okay, or the Spanish, are going to have two different strategies when it comes to getting to India as quickly as they can. Well, the Portuguese strategy is going to start with a very, very old idea of let's go around Africa, right? They're going to decide that they're going to try and lily pad leap all the way over around Africa, funded mostly by their king, Henry the Navigator, right? Well, actually not their king, he's a prince. He's Prince Henry the Navigator. He's actually a brother to the king at the time. And they, being the little country right here on this map, the Portuguese, are going to try and bounce their way all the way around Africa to get to India over here in the Indian Ocean. So as you can tell, knowing maps is pretty important for this unit, okay? Now, this is going to take decades to actually accomplish, right? Because they start this whole process right around 1450 to get there, and they're going to have a lot of different failed attempts, right? They're going to have different explorers that try to make it all the way there. They're going to set up trade outposts on the Azores Islands, and then they're also, though, going to start setting up forts along the western coast of Africa. And the Portuguese are going to be the ones that begin the African-based slave trade system that is going to become very, very important as we discuss this later on. Because we're going to discuss how awful that thing was, how disgusting it was, and how basically it's going to lead to the spreading of African people in a diaspora throughout other areas of the planet, right? But they're going to be the ones that actually begin to create those forts and begin that slave trade system, right? Now, by 1497, that's when they finally pull it off, right? By 1497, one guy by the name of Vasco da Gama actually makes it all the way around Africa and gets all the way to India, because the biggest area that they were concerned about was this area down here at the southern tip of Africa, which one earlier sailor by the name of Bartholomew Diaz actually referred to it as the Cape of Storms, because it was so bad and so weathery and so tumultuous and filled with just these like really, really, really bad weather patterns, he could never make it past there. Well, Vasco da Gama is the first guy to take 4 vessels all the way around that area and get all the way to India and bring out stuff all the way back. And as the very first Portuguese sailor to make it all the way to India and get all the way back, he makes a ton of money off of the spices that come back. Because remember, y'all, spices were very expensive, okay? And they were very expensive because they traded hands so many times. But this guy, just before Portugal, went all the way there, picked the spices up directly from the source, and went all the way back, saving Portugal a lot of money. They were able to charge us a little bit less for their spices, and they sold them wholesale real quick, right? Making a ton of money for the Portuguese government, and also a ton of money for himself. And then also another big thing we need to understand, though, is because he made it past that southern tip of Africa, became known as the Cape of Good Hope, right? It was located down here. That right there is the Cape of Good Hope, right? Because he said, look, if you can get past there, you're home free. And you hope the fact that India is just right over there, right? But the Cape of Good Hope was at the southern tip of Africa after Vasco da Gama. By the way, a little fun fact about it as well, he also made a bunch of money because he didn't have to pay a lot of his sailors because a bunch of them died from a disease known as scurvy, right? So like now looking into it though, we'll talk about how half of his sailors died from scurvy in class a little bit. We'll talk about how gross a disease scurvy is and stuff like that and how it literally makes your teeth fall out. But the other thing you need to understand though, speaking about breaking into the monster marketplace, is the Portuguese are going to be the very first people to go all the way around the Cape of Good Hope, get to India in 1497, and come all the way back. But something that some of y'all probably know, I know Addison Persis right now is just like, wait a minute, but I thought Columbus was in 1492. He was. Columbus actually sailed 5 years before that, right? And he actually had already ran into 2 brand new continents that nobody actually knew anything about. But something we need to understand is he sailed for Spain, even though he himself is Italian, right? So like Columbus, an Italian sailor, had the idea to go west, right? And he was like, look, I'm going to head west from Spain, and I'm going to pop up on the other side of the world, right? He actually went to a bunch of Italian government workers first. He went to Genoa, he went to France, trying to beg them for this idea. And he was like, look, I need boats. I need boats to get there, right? And he had the idea to go west, pop up on the other side of the world, and go to India from a southern route. Well, he finally found some suitors after multiple failed attempts, and the suitors are going to be the financiers, the royals of the Spanish crown, by the name of Isabella and Ferdinand. And they're very, very important. As the king and queen of Spain, they're grandma and grandpa to a very important person that we've actually talked about. Charles V, the same guy that told the Pope to tell Henry VIII no from divorcing his aunt, Catherine of Aragon. He is the grandchild of Isabella and Ferdinand, king and queen of Spain, the same people that gave Columbus the money and the ships and the stuff to go off to try and find like his way to get to India, right? Well, the thing about it is he took 3 ships from them and also a 90-10% contract where basically the financiers, or like Isabella and Ferdinand, were like, whatever you find, we get 90% of it, you get 10, right? The thing about it is he took the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, the 3 boats given to him by the Spanish royals, and he found a lot of stuff because he ran into 2 continents nobody ever knew was there. Because after 3 months, Columbus's voyage is going to land in the Bahamas on accident in August of 1492, beginning a huge incursion of Spanish forces into those different areas and leading to a takeover and a colonizing of these areas by Spanish forces. And then also kind of creating a salivating like attempt of like other places like England and France. We're going to want to go off and do the same thing.
Thank you, Mr. Terry from last year. Really appreciate you doing all that hard work. All right, now anyway, what we're going to do though is we're going to talk about a couple more little things real fast before we continue to move on and get into what's going to happen in the wake of Spanish and Portuguese exploration, right? So going into it, what you have to understand is now that Columbus has landed in North and South America, well, not really in North and South America after he lands in the Caribbean, but after the Spanish actually end up kind of running accidentally into what they will later call the New World, even though it isn't that new, it's pretty old because it's been there for a long time. People knew about it already. The thing about we need to understand, though, in general, is there's going to be a very, very different kind of approach to things, okay? Because the Portuguese are now over in Asia, and then you've got the Spanish now over in North and South America. So they're going to need to do this thing where they kind of like cut the map up a little bit, right? And so going into this, what's going to happen is a very, very all-important line is going to be drawn, right? And that line is known as the line of demarcation, also known as the Treaty of Tordesillas, right? Now, this line is going to be very, very important because it's trying to prevent future war, all right? So for those of you who ever actually, like, you know, shared a room with a sibling or anything like that, you might understand this pretty well, right? The line of demarcation is going to be extremely important because it's literally going to have a line that gets drawn down the middle of the globe that's going to separate Portugal and Spain and the stuff that they're allowed to go for, okay? It was drawn by Alexander VI, one of the later popes. Actually, he's the pope that came right before Julius II, and he absolutely did not get along with that guy whatsoever. But that's neither here nor there. Alexander VI has this line drawn, and he says to all the Portuguese, you get this right-hand side of the map, and the Spanish get this side of the map. Now, as you can see, the line got redrawn in 1494, about a year later, and it actually cut the tip of Brazil off that they didn't know that was there, and the Portuguese ended up going and settling Brazil. That's why Brazilians speak Portuguese instead of Spanish, because the Spanish are going to colonize all of this area, leading to the people that they're now speaking the language of Spanish, right? So the line of demarcation's effects can be felt even in the modern era, but just keep that in the back of your mind, right? That the Pope is going to have that line drawn, giving Portugal the right side going towards India, and Spain gets the left side going towards North and South America, okay? Now, really quickly, though, also something to remember, why would the Pope draw this line? Like, why would the Pope get involved in this at all, right? Why does he even have any stake in the game? These are boats and people and dudes bringing stuff back and making their own countries more wealthy. Well, that right there is the reason why the Pope got involved, right? Alexander VI got involved because he didn't want these two countries to go to war with one another, all right? It's 1494. The Reformation hasn't started yet, so everyone at the time is still super Catholic. And the way that Alexander VI looks at this, he's like, in the meantime, while they're actually going and exploring all this stuff and they're making tons more money, if they go to war with each other, they'll waste that money fighting one another. If I actually keep them separated, the money will actually increase for the church as well, because the tithe is a percentage. It's not a flat fee, right? So, because remember, it's 10% of your income. And if you've got, you know, more money than you did last week, you're donating more money to the church, right? So that's why the Pope got involved, all right? That is the big thing that we need to understand, is why would he draw this? Because economic gain, was basically, excuse me, let me rephrase that. Why would he draw this? Because the church stood to gain from this, right? And remember, this is that pre-Reformation church, right? This is all happening before Martin Luther ever even wrote the 95 Theses, all right? And it's going to actually kind of have drastic impacts on the amount of money the church can make, so that's why he has it drawn, right? Now, couple later people that we also need to know as well when we're studying the growth of exploration is this guy, Amerigo Vespucci, right? Is one of the big ones we need to know. And why he's important is just a really quick little thing. He is an Italian cartographer, right? What a cartographer is a man who makes maps, okay? Of course, we looked at all those technology pieces, cartography being one of them. But Amerigo Vespucci is just credited as being the very first person to realize that North and South America were not just two big islands, right? A lot of the Spaniards and a lot of the conquistadors assumed or thought that North and South America were just going to be two pretty big islands, right? And then literally Amerigo Vespucci comes along, he's like, no, we're actually pretty far away from China, and these are two very large land masses, right? And so to give him credit for being the one that discovered this entire idea, they said, okay, we'll call them the Americas then, because you're the one that do like the most complete maps of these areas, right? Now, he didn't even know, though, Amerigo Vespucci didn't even know, though, that was two whole new continents, right? Like, he thought it was just really big land masses, but then later on they find out that they gave naming credit to two giant continents to this guy, and that's why it's called North and South America, right? Like so. But going into it also, though, there's one other guy you need to know as well, a guy by the name of Magellan, right? Like, some of y'all's, like, you know, uncles, dads, like brothers might actually wear Magellan fishing gear, right? But what it's named after is a Portuguese sailor by the name of Ferdinand Magellan, right? Now, he is the very first captain to be credited with circumnavigating the globe, right? right? Something we need to understand about his voyage is he leaves right around 1519, right? And he starts on a voyage from Portugal to try and go all the way around the world, right? Because that's what the word circumnavigation means, right? Is to try and sail all the way around the world. Magellan's voyage is going to yield a couple of big impacts that are going to reflect on us in the modern era. For example, when he gets down here at the very, very bottom of South America, he actually hits a lot of storms and a lot of really, really intense like weather. It's actually known now as the Drake Passage, but whenever he went around this cape down here, you have to understand that when he gets past it, he almost died and the ships almost sank because the storms were so bad. And so when he got out into this water over here in 1520, he was like, wow, this water is so peaceful. So he named that body of water the Pacific, right? And that's why it's called the Pacific Ocean, because it's passive and more flat. And it was like after all those like crazy storms. But the better part of his entire story, though, is the one where he actually landed in the Philippines. By around 1521, he actually ends up in the Philippines, and he bounces around there and he tries to spread Christianity. Where the locals in the Philippines are like, we don't want your Christianity, and they ended up killing him, right? So Magellan actually died in the Philippines. He did not complete the entirety of his journey through around the world, right? This is an interesting fact that I think most people need to know, and history books need to be actually reflecting all these things. Something that you have to realize is that Magellan did not circumnavigate the globe because he died, right? His dead body in the voyage made the entire journey, but like the thing about it in general is he did not, right? Because he died halfway through. The person who actually we believe is being credited with the actual complete journey, only one man that we know of on the entire voyage stayed on the voyage from start to finish. And it was a man by the name of Enrique, right? And Enrique, spelled Enrique, Enrique, right, is going to be actually an African slave, okay? Like that literally is the only man that stayed on the voyage from start to finish. So technically, Enrique is the man who first navigated the entire globe, an African slave, not Magellan, all right? So like now, interesting little fact about that. But that right there is where we're going to end it off, because right now we're going to get into our next class talking about what the world is going to look like after we drew that line down the middle and talk about the big expeditions into these new territories, all right? But I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.